Subsidies and quotas, part of our lecture series on government intervention. In this video, we will discuss how subsidies can also affect consumer and producer behavior, and how governments can impose quantity restrictions, as well as the price restrictions that we discussed in the previous video. Let me define a subsidy. A subsidy is the opposite of a tax. It's a payment from the government to alter the supply or demand of a good. The effects of a subsidy are opposite the effects of a tax. I don't want to go into detail about what those effects are in this lecture, but let me refer you to another economist with her handle Jody Econ Girl. She has a great series of videos about subsidies, and here's a link to the first one in that series. One of the ways the government can alter the market is by imposing rationing. In other words, restricting the quantities of the good to not the equilibrium quantity in order to distribute the goods in a different way. Now, what we have here is from 1989, a ration card for bread from Romania. This ration card would allow a family to get a certain amount of bread and no more every week or 2 weeks, and people would present this to the place that was distributing the bread in order to receive their ration of bread. But there was no way to purchase more, at least officially. There was no way to change the kind. There was no variety. This was just bread that people could get when they showed up to the bread distribution point. So what happens when the government either allocates or prohibits or restricts the quantity that would be supplied in the market? Let's see. Let's say we're looking at the market for surgical masks. So we have our standard supply and demand model with the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity marked. If we ration it with this quantity rationed on the x-axis, we'll see that this quantity rationed intersects the demand and supply curves, and everything to the right of that, between the quantity rationed and the equilibrium quantity, that's no longer supplied in the market. So whatever economic surplus was gained by those transactions can no longer be gained in the market. Now, you may ask what the new price is, and we actually don't know. Economists can't really predict in terms of rationing where the price would be. It's somewhere between the minimum price and the maximum price, as illustrated on the y-axis. It really depends on the bargaining power of the suppliers and consumers, where that price would be. It could be anywhere in that range. Now, you might think, okay, well, that's a restriction of quantity. But what if the government stepped in and wanted to overproduce something, wanted to make sure that every household had masks, or every household had refrigerators or some other good, and so the government sets a production target that's above what the market would supply. And here we can think about the market for American cheese, which is something that American farmers do overproduce. And again, we have our standard supply and demand model, and we're going to put this overproduction target. We have this gray triangle. This gray triangle is supply that's entering the market that people don't necessarily want at the equilibrium price and quantity. So in that sense, it's also a negative to the market. So even though it looks like it's overproducing, and that overproduction would supply more to the market, we're actually being inefficient, because this area is full of people whose willingness to pay is lower than the price of the item or the marginal cost of the item. So these people are generating negative economic surplus. Now, we talked about allocating less than the market would allocate, and we talked about allocating more than the market would allocate. Well, what if the government was able to pick it exactly right? What if the government was able to hit exactly the same target that the market would? What would be the potential drawbacks of the government setting this rather than the market setting this. Go ahead and go to the participation channel on Slack to discuss this further. I'd like to know your opinions on what would happen if the government set the quantity target exactly right. What might be the potential drawbacks of that? So, in summary, the government can restrict quantities as well as prices, and the effects on the market are essentially the same. You still have a market failure. Thank you.